And welcome, hello viewers, and welcome to D-Infinity Live, the slightly infected, never rejected, holographically projected, firewall protected, monuments erected, introduction perfected, multi-platform, multi-publisher, live tabletop gaming supplement. I am your host, William T. Thrasher. With me, as always, is Michael Jolly Varhola. Brandon, he has a new couch, Cass, and our friend from down under, Heath. Hey, everybody.
Hi, Will.
Come on, keep that energy.
You really have gotten a lot better at that intro. Like you can watch the progression of that intro. We're at the peak here.
Well, I expect to see more energy because I'm still recovering from the con crud, and I'm still projecting more energy than all three of you guys combined.
I'll step it up. I do have a new couch. I'm really excited about it. It's a neutral brown leather, quite comfortable.
Is it true neutral?
No, it's not. Neutral. It's more chaotic neutral. It's not quite as irritating as true neutral.
All right, well, tonight, if you can't tell by the sound of my horrible, scratchy, phlegmy voice, tonight's show is A Plague of Plagues. We're going to be talking about sickness and disease in tabletop gaming campaigns. But before we jump into that topic, we have a few things to go over. First, Brendan, since we've already got you on a roll, what is going on with our website, d-infinity.net?
Well, I'm sad to say this, but we have reached the end of Chris Van Dielen's one-a-day monster adaptations for Mutant Future. So he ended with a monster called Xenon and a cool monster, I think a particularly cool monster, called a wireless ghost, which is like this ghost that gets stuck in a Wi-Fi network or something like that. But we're done with that. So I think that's going to deserve some kind of anthology treatment. So you can look forward to seeing that on D-Infinity. You can see them all in one place together. But yeah, that's the end of that. He's been doing them for so long, I kind of figured he would go on forever. But that doesn't mean we've stopped doing cool stuff. If you go there now, you can see two defects posted by Mike. One of them is shouts at the media. So if you have this particular defect, you would probably be shouting at me right now because I don't agree with your particular agenda. Or there's one inspired by, well, one H.P. Lovecraft story in particular, but it actually is appropriate for most of H.P. Lovecraft's characters, which is suicidal tendencies. A character that has had something horrible happen to them with that defect will attempt to commit suicide. And for those of you who do not know, defects are an OGL
mechanic,
which are anti-feats. So basically, you take one of these, it's a detriment to your character, but it's offset by an additional feat. So it's balanced out, but it makes your character a little bit more well-rounded.
Right.
Then Derek Holland posts about his favorite D&D spells, which is fun because he talks about all the clever things he's used these D&D spells for, which are sort of atypical uses for them. So that's what's going on in D-Infinity. I'd say it's a lot, and definitely worth visiting for.
Very cool. And Mike, what is going on with our co-publisher, Skirmisher?
Well, we've got a couple of releases out since the last time we had a show. So we had one out today, just today. We have, once again, going back to our wonderful Chris Van Dielen, who, in tribute to our medical theme, we'll be calling Chris VD tonight. He cranked out Wisdom from the Wastelands, number 41, variant forms or other forms of radiation. So basically, he takes a look at about 20 different kinds of radiation: alpha, beta, gamma, epsilon, abyssal, just every kind of radiation he could come up with, and puts its effects into game terms. So it's actually a really fun issue, and it's really good for post-apocalyptic games, which really just have radiation. He's looking at the different kinds of radiation and the different kinds of effects they can have. Really, really very sophisticated and easy to plug into a Gamma World or Mutant Future or other post-apocalyptic game. So as usual, Wisdom from the Wasteland is 99 cents. if you're thinking that you might want to take a look at it, there's no reason not to take a look at it. And then the other thing that we've come out with is the next volume in our Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, which is Encounters. And actually, Brendan and Will, I believe you both contributed to that.
Indeed,
I'm almost
we have.
certain that I did. And it is basically 17 detailed, fully annotated and described, but system-free random encounter tables for different types of terrain in different countries. So that has actually been very well responded to. It was in the hottest small press top 100 list for about a week. So people have responded very well to that. And it's on Drive-Thru RPG now. I recommend people take a look at that. Being system-free, you can use it with any fantasy game and with in almost any kind of traditional fantasy setting. So I recommend people take a look at that. And then what we've got in the works is a number of things tying in with our Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. All of us sitting here right now are contributing and working on Lives of Coast, which is going to be a book of 114, I believe, biographies of characters in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. Once again, system-free, so that people can adapt and easily use them with any kind of a fantasy game that they're playing.
You don't get 100 NPCs anywhere. These are well thought out characters. They're actually characters. They're not just descriptions.
That's right.
And you get 100 of them. A lot of them have shown up in novels, so they have a lot of background and they feel very well fleshed out.
Yeah, and we call it Lives of Coast, and that's going back to that's another one of our classical tributes. That's referring to books like Plutarch's Lives or these various books of biographies that were written by classical Greek and Roman authors. And that's what this is. This is a classical book of biographies, but they're for the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. And you know what? Every time I work on a project like this and I see the perspectives that other people bring to it, I say, wow, this is so much better than something I could have just done by myself. Not because I'm not a great writer. I actually am a great writer. But getting perspectives from other people and really just getting this kind of synergy going, it really, really, really shows in a project like this. And I think people are going to be really pleased with it. And then once we get that knocked out, all we've got left is one more volume, World of Coast, which is an overview of the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting. And then we're going to combine them all into a consolidated book, hopefully by the end of July, and have that available for our readers. So that's what we've got in the works at Skirmisher right now.
So that means the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting that we've been slaving over forever, that our Kickstarter fans are dying to get their hands of in print, will finally be available by the end of July?
That's what we're shooting for. I can't promise it'll be available in print by the end of July, but what I think is realistic is that the book will be available as a PDF, and then we'll send it to print, and then as soon as it's ready, we'll send it the actual print version out. But the PDF preview of the print version we expect to have in people's hands in July. That is correct.
Excellent. And Heath, what have you got going on?
Not much that hasn't already been mentioned with Lives of Coast. Yeah, that's about it. I've been busy liking and sharing and trying to make things viral, just fitting in with today's theme.
Any new business on the Antipodian D20 page?
Still in its infancy. Just sort of, I've got a few posts up there, mainly pertaining to what we're doing here. A few of the local artists here that I know that are going to different cons. Paul I can never remember how to say his last name. It's either Kajigi or Kagiji or something like that. Nice guy, great guy. Got a alternate fantasy comic book called Pandia, and it's what if the barring any obliterating sort of results, what if the moon broke apart and sort of fell to earth and we didn't have it anymore, sort of, and he's gone off on that sort of, and it's a great read. It's a great read. He was at Supernova convention in Sydney last weekend, and pretty sure he got to meet Stan Lee while he was there. But
very cool.
yeah, so just sort of busy trying to promote some of the local stuff here as well as my international friends, but still pretty much in its infancy.
Now, Will mentioned your anti-Podian site. Does that mean you're against feet? Is that what I'm to understand from that?
Yeah, I'll let you pick which character from Game of Thrones is my favorite.
Well, hey,
unless you've read.
You can't trust feet. Most of them are complete heels.
And of course, we're talking about your Antipodean D20 page.
Occasionally, they toe the line.
Well, before we continue to punish the audience as we have been,
have a lot of soul.
I think it's time we moved on to our main topic, the plague of plagues, which is disease, sickness, illness, all those creeping cruds and downright lethal infections that can get into your character. But before we get into any questions and comments from our viewers, I'd just like to go around the room and have everybody give just their general perspective on diseases in tabletop gaming. And from my own perspective, as a player, I find diseases to be one of the least fun things in a tabletop game, but that's pretty much because as a player, I've only experienced horribly written, horribly narrated diseases that just kill you or cripple you in some way, rather than inconvenience your character in an interesting way. As a GM, I love diseases because I love narrating, what it does to you and what it makes the character feel. And I also know enough about diseases to realize that a disease doesn't have to be lethal to have an impact on a game. Sure. It can just be inconveniencing. If you eat some food that's infected with the disease, you don't have to slowly die from internal rotting. You could instead be chaotically flatulent for the next D6 days, and that's going to impact your character in any number of ways, and can add an interesting dimension to the game. How about you, Mike?
Well, first, I'd like to note that you did cut off Heath while he was finishing his point, so I don't know if that makes you a heel or an arch heel. But
left feet not flat-footed.
Without belaboring that theme. I like disease in the games, and I won't take away anything that Brendan is going to say, but he actually did a nice comparison recently on D-Infinity Online of how disease is handled in different game systems. And I won't repeat what he said, but I will say that I think, in my opinion, disease got handled pretty well in the D20 game system. By the time it hit version 3.5, I think they had handled disease pretty well. Disease, like poison in basic and first edition D&D, was basically all or nothing. Basically, just like with poison, if you caught a disease, you died. That was it. There was only one kind of disease. There were fatal diseases. Everything in first edition was fatal. It either didn't affect you or it killed you. And I think they really did a much better job of it. So I think that represented a good transition. But Will, you and I are working on a book right now called Insults and Injuries. It's by our friend Eric Lee, MD, who would invite to be with us tonight, but I think he has emergency room duty or something, being an actual medical doctor. And this actually takes real-world diseases and other maladies and puts them into game terms. So this takes what they did right in OGL, in D20, and takes it to the next level. Now we've got diseases that have variable effects, can affect characters in all sorts of different ways, be contracted in different ways, but we've done away with the foolishness of cackle fever and all this kind of made-up bullshit. You don't need cackle fever if you've got rabies or the Black Plague or something like that. So I would say that I like diseases, and I like being able now to use real-world diseases in a compelling and interesting way in the context of game. And because they can add to the story. Not because they're just another way to kill characters, but because they add another element to the game altogether.
Very cool. And how about you, Heath?
I'm all in favour of diseases and viruses in gaming, so long as it suits the level of play. You don't want a GM or a DM insisting that you roll every 5 minutes for a symptom if your guy is on a wagon train to nowhere somewhere. If we had a side quest once where one of the guys contracted some disease, and we're all fairly low level, so no one could we couldn't heal each other, sort of thing. And so it was a side quest to go and find this leaf or this berry or something like that. And in the mornings when the character woke up, the DM would make us do a roll to check, and if he failed it, he got the shivers for the day, which was like -1 to everything, sort of thing. And that one-off roll for the day was I think a much better way of doing it, rather than rolling every 5 minutes to see what your ailments are. So level of gameplay is a big one for me. If it suits the game, if it suits the game, go for it. If it's going to bog it down in too much game mechanics, you're better off without it.
Like anything.
And how about you, Brendan? Opening comments on disease.
Okay. Well, so diseases are pretty cool because they give you an opportunity to both have like a game mechanic, like it's in some cases some monsters have it as an attack, but it's one of the few devices where it could be used as an attack, but it could also be used as like an adventure hook, right?
Yep.
So diseases are very, very flexible. I think, and Mike hinted at this when he talked about insults and injuries. And the D20 system does do a very good job, and I did compare a bunch of different systems, and I'll mention that comparison. But real diseases, people relate to those better. Ebola means a lot more to somebody than mummy rot. I don't know what mummy rot means.
Right.
But I know what Ebola means. I know that
Right.
Ebola means I'm bleeding from every one of my orifices, you know? Things like that. It's pretty horrifying. When your character catches Ebola, you know you're screwed, right? When your character catches a cold, you know you're screwed. But cackle fever versus mummy rot, I don't know what the severity of either of those are until I make I either succeed or fail on my fortitude save. So like I know what the DC is, and that's it. So I'm a big fan of using real diseases. I'm also at the same time also a fan of using diseases in a social context. There are some diseases that might not overtly affect you in any way until like 10 years later maybe, but they might begin to show some sort of physical element, right? Like a rash or something like that. Then all of a sudden, people in your community start to treat you differently, especially in a fantasy. Well, and maybe depending on how prevalent magic is, maybe it's not a big deal. But in a low magic fantasy setting, there aren't going to be a lot of people who can cure some of these terrible diseases. So they're going to treat you differently when they know you're infected. So I like to use it a lot as a role-playing and social mechanic. I'm not really that interested in debilitating my characters to the point where they can't function anymore. It should serve a bit as a stick that motivates them to do stuff, but it shouldn't keep them out of the game. And then, as far as my comparison goes, I did a D20 variant, which was Pathfinder. I thought Pathfinder did a very good job. They had a lot of examples. Some of them were real world, which I appreciated. I did D6 fantasy. So the D6 fantasy game, my issue with that is they didn't have a dedicated section to disease. They kind of lumped it in with poison. So I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity. And then we had RuneQuest. That was the final one that I took a look at, which I thought rolled up a lot of the same mechanics that you saw in D20, but the one reason why I liked RuneQuest more, it's a percentile system, but the one reason why I liked RuneQuest more was because it felt more organic, because your disease has to roll against its potency and you roll against your resilience.
It's a good system.
It's the disease fighting against you as opposed to the disease just statically sitting there until you attempt to get rid of it. So I did like that, and I think that's a more realistic representation of diseases. But yeah, they all do a fairly good job in their own way. The reason why I was very interested in seeing how different game systems do it is because I'm developing my own game system. So that's my take on disease. I was a little long-winded there, but I hope it was all valuable.
You know, the long winds could be a disease. Maybe that's what I'll call that chaotic flatulence disease.
Running babbilitis.
Well, I have both of those.
Lexicological vomit. But Mike, you had a comment you wanted to address.
Yeah, one of our readers, Darren Anthony, had made a comment when we announced the theme of this show sometime over the past week, and he said something to the effect of, "Oh my God, I end up fighting a bunch of dire wolves, and once I've survived that, then I've got to worry about catching rabies. I've got to worry about disease." And I think he made a very good point, and I think that ties in with what Keith was saying about not bogging down the game with this. For me, and everything Brendan said about using disease in the context of role-playing and all that, I think that's great on a strategic level. On a tactical level, when I'm using disease, it's basically going to be a device for increasing the challenge rating of a monster or increasing the challenge of a particular encounter. So I'm not going to run characters up against a bunch of dire wolves where that's like the penultimate encounter of the scenario. That's the second worst thing they fight in the scenario. They're battling these dire wolves, and then I'm just gonna after they kill the vampire or the lich or whatever, say, "Oh, and by the way, you all have rabies." I don't think that's the from a story arc point of view is the way to handle it. On the other hand, if a character party is second or third level and they've got to wade through a garbage-strewn room to collect something that's on the other side of it, and they all end up suffering one or two minor bites from dire rats who they then slaughter mercilessly, and they're sort of laughing off about what a pushover encounter it was, and nobody even bothers to heal their wounds because they've only taken 3 or 4 points of damage, and they all just march on smugly. That's when you pull out the disease. That's when something filth-born or rabies-oriented starts manifesting, when their wounds start to ooze pus and turn black, and then once you describe that, you have them make a saving throw. So using it as something to enhance combat encounters or encounters in the context of the game, that's how I would handle it. That's how what I would tell our friend Darren. Not that I would just use it any time that realistically a disease could appear, but that I would use it when it enhances the story or enhances an encounter.
Well, actually, related to that, for me, a lot of it has to do with the nature of the game itself, because games like Hackmaster and classic Warhammer Fantasy are games that are meant to be very lethal and meant to be very harsh and meant to reflect classic fantasy, but in a very dark medieval world where infection can be just as deadly as the monsters. And in those games, I do make it a priority that you have to keep your wounds clean and stay free of infection and deal with rabies and very common diseases that you could get off of a wild animal, because that's that is an intrinsic part of the nature of that game.
I'm with you, Will. The game that I'm currently developing right now explicitly says that if you go a couple days without bandaging yourself or cleaning up yourself, that it'll get infected. That doesn't kill you. It might kill you eventually, but you'd have to ignore it for a really long time. But it will mess with you. And in a game where every point against you could make a difference between living or dying, that's pretty bad. But yeah, you're right, Will. In a really dark and gritty kind of RPG system, disease, I think, has a very common and is just omnipresent, something you got to keep in the back of your mind, because everything kills you. You can fall down the stairs and die,
That's
so
right.
Disease should be something that's always kind of in the back of your mind.
Right, an omnipresent threat, if not an omnipresent occurrence.
Mm-hmm. Right, you should be clever enough to avoid it, I think.
Oh, and we've got our first, appropriately enough, our first user comment is actually from Heath, and I thought this was a really good one. Are there any bonuses or upsides to plague, pestilence, and disease? Do you at least give a bonus to the next saving throw for a disease that they've been exposed to before? And that actually is a great house rule, and one I have used, my only requirement being the player has to know what disease they've survived, because I, as a GM, I don't need to have a disease antibody track in addition to everything else I got to keep track of. But in my experience, in my campaigns, there have actually been two big advantages to diseases. One, people dead of plague. That's a body that nobody wants to touch. So you can loot that body for money and gear with impunity, assuming you have some countermeasure to keep yourself from being infected by the plague that killed the corpse. And then the other thing, and this is more of a specific example, I was running an all-flesh-must-be-eaten game where the zombies were created by an alien plague. It was originally a symbiotic organism that mutated and became a zombie plague, but it was telepathic, and that's why zombies were stupid. It would drain all the intelligence out of their head and broadcast it into space, where it was being collected by this big psychic organism. So if you got infected with the zombie disease, for the first day or two, you actually became telepathic. And being telepathic was incredibly useful. You could detect ambushes. You could tell if someone was lying and was going to join your party or just try to take your supplies. You could detect the presence of zombies from the few brainwaves they're projecting out. But it would still turn you into a zombie after a day or two, and so that always became a big point of contention. It's like, okay, a member of our party is telepathic, and that's very, very useful. At what point? What's that perfect point? They're going to change so we can kill them, but still get as much use out of their telepathy as possible. And it also led to one of the more interesting discussions. Well, like, I know I'm going to die. I'm going to turn into a zombie soon. You're going to have to put me down. Would anyone like to voluntarily be infected with what I have so you guys can have access to telepathy for another day or two? And that really was a turning point in that campaign.
How long did that party last?
They only lasted about 3. Well, they lasted about 3 days, but then it was like a 1950s thing. So the government and the G-men showed up and cleaned up the alien zombies. However, they were all given medals of freedom for staying alive as long as possible, but were then sealed in a vault under Area 51.
I'm gonna coin a new word tonight. This is deliberately taking a disease because of the game advantage it gives you. Metatastasizing. We need to add that to our records.
But
That's
Mike,
good.
I mean, think about it. If you know that, well, no one would make that choice.
A gamer would.
So only a gamer would. Only a gamer would make that choice. No human being would be like, well,
I don't know.
I'll die in a couple days, but at least I'll be telepathic.
Can't I just kind of try to guess? Wouldn't that be better?
Actually, you know who would do it? I'll tell you who will do it, all right? And I'm being dead serious here. I watched a documentary on the Russians, okay? This was Soviet Russia. They were developing a nuclear-powered bomber, okay? This was a bomber that didn't need to land for months, okay? The Americans tried to do this, and they scrapped the project because they couldn't shield their nuclear reactor. So what the Russians did is they took old people, and they put the old people in the jet, because when the old people got irradiated, it didn't matter because they weren't having children anyway. So you know who would voluntarily get infected by a disease like that? Soviet Russians. They would send the old people who weren't going to live very long anyway. They would send the terminally ill who weren't going to live very long anyway, and they would send them over to America because they're telepathic, and they would be able to gain some kind of intel. They would do it for Mother Russia. So there are certain circumstances where I could see that actually happening, and it would probably be the Russians.
Well,
Or the
Heath,
North Koreans.
Heath, as this is your question, did you have any examples of advantageous diseases?
I did
Really
actually.
interviewing ourselves. Isn't this really just a bit much? Hey, I have a question for myself when you're done.
Okay, well, when Heath is finished, you can you can ask yourself anything.
Why is it? Why is it? I could see gaming with you guys, and you know, your zombie PC to be grabbing the infected zombie, going bang. Can you sense anyone? No, good. Bang, bang. No, my example comes back to the game I was saying about when we were low level, looking for a cure to a disease, and this is where a disease can be an upside. Is the infected party member had like it really sort of haggardly disfigured, like almost like it could be mummy rot, I can't remember, skin hanging off the face sort of thing, in which they used to wear like bandages on there with a cowl and that sort of thing. And we were 10 miles from town. We just had a battle of encounter a bugbear or something, I can't remember what it was, and brigands jumped out and wanted to rob us. And the guy whose character was the infected one, oh, to hell with this, took off his bandage and went, blah, blah, blah. The brigands failed their role and legged it.
Sure, yeah, and that's a good use of something like that in a role-playing context. So yeah.
I think the GM gave us like a +5 to intimidate or something for his role because of the disfiguring physical appearance.
Yep.
If you have leprosy, people tend to try to stay away from you. Having lived in a country where there is a lot of leprosy, I can say this for fact. You do try to avoid them, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, Mike. What question do you want to ask yourself?
Well, actually, I won't bother to ask myself. Well, I guess I could put it that way. Mike, what interesting things regarding disease have you learned recently? I actually learned something pretty interesting with regard to disease, and that is that the vast majority, and this is interesting because it's a case study, and once you know something like this, you can expand it ad infinitum in the context of a game. The vast majority of cases of leprosy in North America, and Brendan had mentioned leprosy, the vast majority of cases of leprosy in North America occur in Texas and Louisiana. Huh, why is that? Why would that be? Because the vast majority of people who eat roadkill armadillo live in Texas and Louisiana, and it turns out that armadillos, this is something that nobody had known, are leprosy carriers. So now in an age when leprosy has almost been eradicated, most of the people who contract leprosy in North America contracted as a result of eating roadkill or shot, hunted armadillo. So this is certainly something that could form the basis of an adventure. Why is this disease suddenly rampant? How is it spreading? I mean, this is actually something that could form the basis of a pretty cool adventure. You'd want to do a little bit more of it than that, but this is something to keep in mind in the context of a game setting. How are certain diseases spreading? Just because it's written down in the DM's notes doesn't mean that's going to be universal information. So as far as asking myself questions go, that's something that I've read about with regard to a contemporary disease that I think could be adapted pretty well for game scenarios.
And Mike, I have to mention that for further reading, Dr. Eric Lee did post a character class concept on dinfinity.net about the nuisance hunter, or the master of nuisances, but what he does is effectively that. He figures out why disease is spreading in a community.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, Eric obviously did a much better job explaining that than I would, or most people would.
He does a really good job of it.
Yeah.
insults and injuries. Exactly so. And anyone who follows his column, he's got a regular blog that he posts almost every week at D Infinity Online.
That's right.
And examines some specific disease or malady in detail and in the context of how it can be applied in a game. So,
and we mentioned mummy rot enough times. He does actually explain how mummy rot has some scientific basis to it.
Yeah.
So that was kind of clever. But anyway, Will probably wants to take us to more viewer questions.
Indeed I do. And the next one comes from Tom Payne, who wants to know, other than game mechanics, are there actual opportunities for enhancing a campaign or adventuring by having the party quest for a cure? And I say absolutely. It's going all the way back to the dawn of storytelling, people going out on quests to find the right medicine needed to cure either an individual or a whole community is all part of great storytelling, and you can do a lot of that in your tabletop game. I find the only obstacle to that is the game itself you're using. Like if you're running OGL or Pathfinder or things like that, it is really difficult to come up with the disease that people would actually need to go on a quest to cure without giving the disease script shields, because there are plenty of cleric and paladin abilities and just spells that lots of spellcasters have access to that can pretty much purge any disease from your system. So there's no point in saying you have to go to this one mountain on the other side of the world and pluck a single petal off of the purple flower of Drachmodan if you can just cast cure disease on the sun.
That's a good point, and I would say that I'd say that there's some real easy answers to that. One is simply to say, okay, well, this is a disease that is resistant to a third-level cure disease spell. There are certain spells that will kill an NPC if you use it on them, but it won't kill another NPC. Why won't it kill that other NPC? Because that NPC has a particular immunity, because it's higher level. Well, if you start treating diseases more like characters or more fully developed entities, which in fact Eric Lee does in Insults and Injuries to a great extent, then suddenly you get away from that. Yeah, if you're going to say that every disease, no matter what, the common cold or rabies, they're all cured by cure disease, well, sure, you've dumbed down the game to a great extent. But if you want to take it to the next level, you could say, this is a disease from another plane of existence. The spell was never intended to cure it. This is a disease that's more powerful than this level of the spell. So you would need a priest of at least a certain level to cast it, and there's not that many priests of that level, so only a few people are going to be able to survive. There's all sorts of game-isms that you could apply to get around that, even in a system where you've got paladins and clerics who have the ability to cure disease.
Now, I've got something for people who don't want to use a gameism to get around that. And Will used, the term script shield or whatever. If you want to be a clever GM and you want to sneak around that issue, yeah, maybe cure disease cures the disease. But what if your disease has a really high rate of reinfection? If the source of your disease isn't taken care of, and it has a really high rate of reinfection, it doesn't matter how high level you are as a cleric, you only have so many spell slots. You can only cure so many people. So then it turns into an algebra equation. If you can cast 9 spells a day of 3rd level to cast Cure Disease, and it reinfects 20 people a day, what's the difference? Well, you're working on 11 people in the positive that it's reinfecting every day. So you're not actually catching up. That gives you a good reason to quest for the cure, to undo what the characters waste
while they're letting the math work against them.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Will, you're absolutely right. Some systems work better than others for that kind of thing. In cases where diseases are really hard to cure, that's an obvious choice for using disease as a game motivator. But in cases where diseases are easy to cure, don't make the challenge curing the disease, make the challenge curing the source and have it reinfect people.
Yeah.
How about you, Heath? Any comments on this?
A couple of points, some of which have already been touched on, like if you want a disease that's not easy to be cured by magic, set a low magic world, either a homebrew or one of the original ones, something like Dark Sun, where magic was really, forbidden and tabooed. So you force people to go to like a quest for a herb or something like that. Obviously having the adventure I was talking about earlier, low-level characters where you can't cure that many, you can't cast that many curing spells, and then it becomes an algebra equation, like Brendan was saying.
Right.
Or in one of the games I've been in, it was a magical disease where I know that you can get that, and it's been in some of the others. You can get your normal diseases, you can get magical disease. Have it to be a really high potent magic disease where, unless you've got access to like 6th or 7th level cleric spells, just using D&D as an example, you have to have someone either quest for someone to heal, or maybe you need to go and find some uber component to go with your spell to ramp it up to be able to cure the disease or the ailment.
Oh, very cool. And we actually have another question from Tom Payne. Can the cure be more debilitating than the disease itself? Role-playing and mechanics opportunities here. That I think that it can be, but you've got to be so careful when implementing a cure that can be just as harsh as the disease, even if only temporarily. Right. Because players hate to feel like they're being dicked over, and I have actually seen GMs dick over players, by having cures that were way too inconveniencing. I think you really have to be measured. I did a fantasy game where all of the old folktale cures from the Middle Ages actually worked, and one of the best ways to recover from a disease was to get leeches attached to your body. And the leeches would drain the disease out of you. The disease would become the disease would become less and less of a problem until you were cured, but you always suffered from one level of blood loss as long as you were getting the leech treatment. And
sure. That's a good mechanic.
Yeah, and the one level of blood loss, you were basically tired, you were a little bit slow, but it wasn't it wasn't more debilitating than the disease. I would say, however debilitating the disease is, the cure should maybe be half as debilitating, or have an interesting side effect, like maybe you have mummy rot, and the only cure is a special skin cream. So you've got your character, you're getting cured of the mummy rot, but you're covered head to toe in magical calamine lotion, and it looks disgusting and just announces to the world that you're getting treatment.
And I think we've been talking in terms of fatal diseases, and I think the presumption has sort of been that fatality is the end result. And I think having a disease be a nuisance or just an inconvenience, who hasn't had a flu? You know pretty damn well you're not going to die when you get a flu in an industrialized society. The odds are you're not going to die. But you feel like shit. You feel like you're going to die. Imagine if you actually had to wear armor and hike around in some subterranean area where people were trying to kill you when you felt like that. I mean, imagine that. It would be pretty awful. So just imposing things like the effects of aches and pains, minuses to hit, minuses to damage, minuses to saving throws, having your characters make a saving throw to avoid sneezing when they're trying to sneak up on somebody. Just things. Imagine that. That's actually a much better role-playing opportunity than just giving characters that are something that's going to kill them. So giving everybody a horrible case of the con crud, the adventurer's crud, the dungeon crud, giving everybody in the party a case of that, and then having them deal with it. Let's say it's a 5th level party and the cleric can only cast 1 cure disease. Well, that's great. Who's he going to cast it on? So you really could do a lot with a debilitating and nuisance disease where it's understood that probably the characters aren't going to die. But then what happens when it comes to the point where there's a cold pool and it's expedient to plunge yourself into it? But then you've still got this flu. that might be the one case where somebody does end up dying from it. So
Right.
I think there's a lot of role-playing opportunities for nuisance or low-level real-world disease and illness where fatality is not inevitable, but where it can be an indirect cause or an inconvenience because you've got it.
Brendan, Heath, any further comments on this?
Brendan?
Well, just because the difficulty class, I mean, we're talking D20 terms here, obviously, but just because the difficulty class is high doesn't mean that the penalty has to be really high. So the cold, everybody catches, right? The cold, everybody catches the cold because the difficulty class is really high, but the penalty is not really high. So that's an opportunity to give your high-level characters a penalty, but not a big one. You know, even though they're typically used to being able to succeed on their fortitude saves. I don't know anyone who's resistant to the cold. If I sneeze on you, you can be super healthy. You're gonna get sick.
And frankly, the mechanic I would do for something like that on a simple level, I would just say -2, -2, -2. But what if we were to say that all of your good bonuses get reduced to the very worst bonuses for a particular class? So your fighter's attack bonuses, when you've got a flu, suddenly are equal to a magic user's attack bonuses. All right, that's scalable based on the level of the character. It's not fatal, but it's pretty damned inconvenient. It's pretty inconvenient if you're used to having a +7 base attack bonus and suddenly you have a +2 base attack bonus because you're stamping around with the flu. Gives you a big incentive to maybe waste time and hole yourself up and try to heal your character.
Now, I had a question I wanted to put to all of you. What is your favorite fictional disease that you would like to adapt and bring into your campaign? And I'll go ahead and get mine right out of the way. There's a fantastic comic book called Gypsy about a Roma truck driver in the near future, and one of the most recent installments of this comic book is called the Aztec Laugh. And the Aztec Laugh is the disease I want to adapt, where it's kind of like rabies. It's a disease that, you know, messes up your neurochemistry, and what it does to you is it makes you very, very aggressive. It makes you very, aggressive and violent, but it also causes all of the muscles in your face to seize up, so you just have this horrible rictus grin that makes you kind of look like some terrifying Aztec god, and it paralyzes your tongue and vocal cords. So even though technically, when you have this disease, you can understand and use speech, you can only communicate with this barking laughter because that's about all your vocal cords and tongue are capable of doing. And it's just rendered in such a wonderfully terrifying way in the comic. I would love to bring that into either a fantasy or a science fiction campaign as a unique disease.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
How about you, Mike?
I've been working on a story off and on for a couple of years called Soldier of the Yellow Sign. And it is a science fiction story. And there's a disease that manifests in that. And it's sort of an alien disease. But what it does, I guess it's a disease potentiator. It's a malady. The people that it afflicts basically manifest any diseases that they're carrying the seeds of in themselves. So anything that would have manifested itself within the next year or two of their lives, whatever, cancer or other illness they would have gotten, manifests itself all of a sudden in full-blown form. So that's like an alien disease potentiator, and it gets used in the context of this big battle at the end of the story, where basically this entire defense force is wiped out because everybody suddenly manifests all these horrible illnesses that they would have gotten. So that's one that I've put into literary terms that I've got to figure out how to do the game mechanics on, because it involves a little bit of projection and luck. Yeah, I don't know what I would call that, but it's some yellow sign malady, and of course the yellow sign is indicative in literature of all sorts of things, fear and fire and disease, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one that I'd like to put into game terms at some point and think could be a lot of fun.
How about you, Heath?
The only one that jumps to mind immediately is from a little slapstick sort of parody piece that I read years ago, and the disease was called scabrous. And what it was, yeah, and if Benoit's watching, I'm sure he'll like this.
Yeah.
What it was spores that if you weren't shielding your face, you'd inhale and would get lodged in your lungs and start to grow and effectively turn your character over the course of, I think it was D4 weeks or days or something, into essentially a blue cheese.
Oh, wow.
Complete with rind and smell, I might add. I think whoever wrote it was probably harking back to the Marshes skit from Monty Python, perhaps.
That one where Faruka Balk gets turned into a blueberry would be pretty good, too.
Oh, that was Violet Beauregard.
Oh, wow, you're a step ahead of me, damn it. You know what I'm talking about.
Sacre bleu.
And the only way to deal with that disease is to get the Zuthe cure.
You know you're in trouble when the party starts breaking out biscuits and dip.
That's right. You taste that lettuce on a hamburger. Crumble you over the top of a hamburger.
How about you, Brendan? Any fictional diseases you'd like to adapt?
So, let's see. Star Trek Voyager. I didn't like the series, but I did like one of their races. They had this one race which was suffering from something they just called the phage, right? So it was a super generic term, but what they did with this race is they were just always in this like state of degeneration. It was basically leprosy on steroids. But what this race did, because it was technologically advanced, is they would hunt around different star systems, scanning people to see if they had a compatible organ so they could swap out their organs as they were degenerating. So what you ended up with is a villain that was suffering from this disease. It didn't transfer to your species, but they were constantly hunting you down because you were the only form of cure that they had.
Ah, interesting.
So I think that made for a very interesting concept. It made maybe like 5 episodes or so. Some nerd's going to correct me and say, well, actually it was 6 episodes, but it doesn't matter. They got a few mentions. I thought they were really cool. I think they definitely deserve their own race. I would adapt it for like a D20 race or something like that. Of a species that is infected with this disease that they can't cure and is hunting down other creatures just so they can do, emergency organ transplants to keep themselves alive.
Yeah.
I actually once statted up an undead like that would have to replace its rotting organs with living organs to keep itself from just outright falling apart. That actually, there's a lot of things you can do with that kind of disease.
Yeah.
But that's more a necromantic horror thing than a disease thing per se, right?
Sure, but it uses a similar mechanic.
Sure.
I think it accomplishes similar things.
Well, I think we had a really good show tonight, but before we go to our final thoughts, I did have one other question just to go around the room, and that is, as a GM, what's your favorite disease-related word that you like to use in your campaign? And for me, when I'm being a serious GM, it's bubo, and when I'm being a ridiculous GM, it's lurgi. How about you, Mike? Favorite disease words as a GM?
Well, I don't know. I did coin metastasize today, so I think that's a pretty good one. And I think our friend Ollie Cass is listening tonight. This isn't actually a disease word, but it's a body fluid word. I use ichor an awful lot when characters are fighting unnatural things. So I'd say ichor is a word that I've been called on, or ichor is a word that I've been called on using quite a bit in the context of the game. So those would be my 2 disease or body fluid related words that I like to use in the context of the game.
Very cool. How about you, Brendan?
Pus, you really can't go wrong with pus. Pus is always gross. Always. Pus gets a feeling from people that blood just doesn't. It's pus. Pus is the only bodily fluid that I know of that hardens and turns like this sickly green. It oozes. Pus, you can pop pus. Like, pus is bad. Pus is a good one.
And then it also gives us pustule, which would probably be my third favorite disease word.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, that's a good one. Good ones. Yep.
How about you, Heath? What's your favorite disease word?
Considering I don't DM or GM too many games, I'll defer to one of my good friends who does run it, and like you said, when you're sort of being a bit silly, lurgi works really well. But not only just a word, but a way to say the word. And Grant, his diction when he runs the game is brilliant, and I think he just says the sickness, and the way he delivers those two words literally has your skin crawl.
Oh, nice and nasty.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been our episode on the Plague of Plagues. Before we sign off, let's just go ahead and give our final thoughts. And my final thought on diseases at the tabletop is, get creative. Like, the reason I bring up all these disease words is, words have power. Don't just describe it as a general sickness or malaise. Give it cool things like pustules and boils and a wet cough, a burning sensation when you perform certain bodily functions.
Yeah.
These are things that can really get players motivated, because it can. Most of us have had these experiences, and a player can immediately relate to what their character is going through. And also, it's fun to just combine words together. Why not have the pustulant cough? Or the trotting itches. You can just come up with all sorts of amazing diseases on the fly, keeping in mind that a lot of disease names perfectly describe the symptoms.
That's right.
Mike, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that people really should check out Eric Lee's Insults and Injuries. It's on Drive-Thru RPG. It's a great book. It is written up with the D20 system in mind. But, that means you can drop it into really just about anything. If you're playing first or second or basic edition, there's nothing in there you're not going to be able to use pretty easily. If you're playing Pathfinder or 4th edition, nothing in there you're not going to be able to use pretty easily. And you and I are in the process of converting that book to Pathfinder, and anyone who has bought the D20 version is going to get the Pathfinder version for free when it comes out.
Excellent.
So this is a good investment. Get the D20 version now. And you will also get the Pathfinder version later. So I'd encourage people to go into Drive-Thru RPG or any of the other sites it's available and check out that book. It's available on Paizo as well. And it's a really terrific book, and I think people will enjoy it, and it'll enhance their games.
Very cool. And Brendan?
We have a dedicated running series of medical-related posts to d-infinity.net on Eric Lee's blog. So if this is something that you're interested in, you want to peruse gamer doctors' thoughts on the subject, you can pick through his blog, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there. So I would, as the maintainer, creator, and developer of d-infinity.net, would be remiss if I didn't recommend people go and check that out.
And he's a real doctor, too.
Yeah, he's an actual doctor.
Yeah, not a doctor of sociology or something.
Right. Actual doctor.
Very, very cool. And Heath, as our special guest, we'll go ahead and give you the last word. What is your last word?
On diseases, have a bit of fun with them. Like you said, Will, creativity. Any GMs out there that want to hand out diseases, have fun with it, and give your characters, as well as this this downside, give them an upside to play with as well, to expand it, make it a bit playable, but ultimately they've got to cure themselves. And my other final word is keep watching this space for Lives of Kos.
Very, very cool. So, for myself, William T. Thrasher, for Michael Jolly Varhola, for Brendan, he's got a new couch, Cass, and for our good buddy Heath, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.